Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Women for Kansas quarterly meeting. I'm Susan Osborne. I'm a member of the State Board of Women for Kansas. As you may know, Women for Kansas has taken a stand against the proposed so-called Value Them Both constitutional amendment. You will find our statement on our Facebook page and on our website. I also want to do a plug that on June 4th, we're having a statewide convention that will cover this issue as well. So mark your calendars. Today, we'll learn about this amendment, which really values women less, the misinformation surrounding it, and what we can do to defeat it, as well as learn about the history of reproductive control. With that, I am very pleased to introduce our speaker, Ms. Rachel Stoutamire, a Kansas organizer for Planned Parenthood of the Great Plains. Planned Parenthood is directly involved in Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, an organization whose goal is to defeat this amendment. Now, I first met this passionate young woman at a Zoom meeting. She talked about the history of abortion in the United States, and I thought we have to have her at a meeting for our Women for Kansas audience. So here she is today. Ms. Stoutamire is a Kansan hailing from Junction City and a graduate of Emporia State University. She's also a former child welfare caseworker in Missouri. She was attracted to Planned Parenthood because as a college student, she felt there was inadequate sex education and birth control information available. So with that, Rachel, take it away.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that lovely introduction and for having me here today. I hope that you all can see my screen. Can someone let me know if they can see my screen? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So again, thank you for having me at your meeting this morning. Thank you for the introduction. I'm honored to be here with you all. As was stated, my name is Rachel Stoutamire. I am a Kansas organizer for Planned Parenthood Great Plains Votes, and I'm excited to talk with you today about the history of reproductive control and the Kansas amendment that threatens the reproductive rights of Kansans. So here's an overview of what we'll be talking about today. I will give a brief history of reproductive control. I will talk about the anti-abortion amendment in Kansas and how it came to be. Then we'll map out our plan to defeat this amendment, and we'll go over a few ways to talk about the amendment with our friends and family. And lastly, of course, I will let you know how you can all help us defeat this amendment. So this morning, we'll be learning about the history of reproductive oppression and the wars that Black women have gone through. And it's not an easy thing to listen to or to learn. Trust me, I know. So with that being said, our first community agreement is to take care of yourself. If you need to take a step back at any time, please do so, but also lean into your discomfort. We can learn through our discomfort if we allow ourselves to. So let yourself feel whatever it is that you feel, examine it, and then allow that to help you grow. The next agreement that I have is there is no such thing as stupid questions. The information that we're talking about today is info, some of it that has been suppressed and may be totally new to some folks. It's still relatively new to me. So any questions that you have, please ask. None of us knows it all, but together we know a lot. Another agreement that I have is to allow for multiple truths. Differing experiences between each other is another way that we learn. And it is totally okay if your truth doesn't align with someone else's, but we should all listen to and respect each other's truths. So those are the agreements that we have for right now. But if there are any other agreements that folks think we should add to this space, come off mute and I will add those to our agreements. But if those agreements are fine, we will just keep trucking on. So the anti-abortion legislation and the abortion bans that we're seeing right now are nothing new, and they actually have a history that is rooted in racism, white supremacy, and sexism. These rules and regulations have very little to do with the well-being of pregnant people and children. Instead, they are about control. The history of reproductive control and oppression begins with Black women. Reproductive decisions for Black women have always been controlled in the United States. The abuse and terrors that Black women faced at the hands of white supremacy and the government set the stage for the reproductive control that we see today. The first thing that we need to talk about is the image of the Black woman. It is because of racist and negative images, stereotypes, and myths that Black women's reproduction and fertility was regulated to begin with. Ever since Black women were brought here as slaves, they were seen as the opposite of white women. White women were viewed as delicate, refined, intelligent, not as intelligent as white men, but intelligent nonetheless, knew to stay in her place and was the perfect mother and wife to her family. But Black women were seen as immoral, careless, domineering, devious, and very promiscuous. This narrative had to be pushed in order to justify controlling every aspect of Black women's lives. A very popular and accepted image of the Black enslaved woman was Jezebel, a woman who was believed to be more fertile than white women, who acted upon her sexual desires and seduced men into having reckless sexual passion. The sexual abuse that enslaved women experienced was blamed on the myth of Black women's promiscuity and supposed hyperfertility. It was not a crime for slave owners to sexually abuse their slaves. They could do literally whatever they wanted to because enslaved people were seen as objects. So white men weren't held accountable for their actions. And this made white women very angry because the supposed Jezebel was going to ruin her marriage and steal her husband. So the infidelity and abuse of white men was tied back to and blamed on Black women. The Jezebel trope is still around today, from the sexualization of girls in schools and policing their clothes through dress codes, to early last year when a Southern Baptist convention leader referred to Vice President Kamala Harris as a Jezebel. Next, we have Mammy, who was the opposite of Jezebel. Mammy was based on the myth that Black women wanted to and loved to take care of white people and their families. She was seen as the opposite of Jezebel because Mammy was desexualized and often depicted as pitch Black and fat so that white men wouldn't want to lust after her. So with her round stomach, big grin, hearty laugh, and loyalty, Mammy was no longer a threat to white women. White people thought that Mammy was competent enough to take care of their children, but too incompetent to care for her own. Once slavery ended, the objectification and dehumanization of Black women continued and was reinforced by law. Just a couple of the dehumanizing regulations include that freed Black women were not allowed the title Miss or Mrs., and they were not allowed to try on clothes in a store. Once television became popular, the stereotype of Sapphire appeared. Sapphire is the start of the angry Black woman trope. She was loud, hateful, emasculating, abusive, and irrationally angry. Sapphire was very dominant and was hypersensitive to social injustices. Sapphire complained often, but her critiques did not come with solutions, and Sapphire came off as bitter and unhappy. The angry Black woman trope is one that is still seen and depicted today. It's one that was started in order to be able to punish Black women for violating the social norms of being passive, servile, and non-threatening. We see the trope of Sapphire continuing today in the increased criminalization of Black women and girls in schools and workplaces, and in who was more likely to face criminal penalties for violating anti-abortion laws. So we've talked about just a few of the myths that led to the negative imagery of Black women, but those myths work hand in hand with the myths that has driven science and legislature. Objectifying Black women made it very easy to control the narratives about them. The myth that Black women feel less pain than white women is one that is still alive, especially in the medical field. When the importation of slaves was seized in 1808, slave owners relied on the reproduction of Black women to sustain slavery. However, the harsh conditions, abuse from slave owners, and everyday afflictions of strenuous labor caused some enslaved Black women to have reproductive issues and/or cause sterility. Slave owners decided to call in physicians to manage Black women's fertility as a result of these issues. The physicians were doctors with no gynecological background and no interest in wanting to treat women. But for the sake of these slave owners and the economy, these unqualified physicians experimented on enslaved Black women in hopes that they'd be able to fix them so they can birth more slaves for their owners. Many enslaved women underwent multiple surgeries, up to 30 surgeries in some cases. They were restrained by physicians who ignored their screams and cries for hours, and sometimes they were restrained by other enslaved Black women who were forced to help. These women were being experimented upon fully awake without anesthesia because of the widely held belief that Black women do not feel pain. These experimental surgeries continued for years and helped advance the study of gynecology and heal white women of the reproductive injuries and illnesses, but without all of the pain and suffering that the Black enslaved women had to endure. So during slavery and after slavery, midwives were extremely important. The current definition of a midwife is someone who is trained to assist in childbirth, but Black midwives did far much more than that. Black midwives were spiritual healers and counselors. They helped with the highs and lows of postpartum, including breastfeeding and cooking. They even performed abortions when needed and necessary. Midwives were the primary source of care for Black birthing people and even for white birth givers. In fact, the traditions of Black midwives became a primary source of care for prenatal, birth, and postpartum care for all women in the United States. But as slavery was coming to an end, white men saw themselves as superior and as professionals with their tools, technology, and modern hospitals. But those modern hospitals excluded the Black midwives who had been doing the work for years from practicing within them. White men ran very successful racist smear campaigns against midwives. Black midwives were painted as dirty, barbarous, ineffective, dangerous, and unprofessional. It was said that the midwives' existence stunts and degrades the progress of science. This smear campaign was also the start of stigmatizing abortion. Midwives treated abortion like any other care that they gave because it is just as much health care as any other reproductive care that they provided. But the campaign vilified abortions to further push out midwives. These male physicians wanted to create a new type of healthcare and did so by completely transforming the reproductive care that midwives had been successfully practicing for centuries. In order to create this new type of healthcare, the physicians had to demean midwives in the care that they gave and politicize and criminalize abortions to give the public even more reason to distrust and bar Black women and Indigenous women from continuing to give reproductive care. So the same white men who had no interest in treating women, no experience in gynecology, and experimented on Black women without anesthesia to help slavery and the economy are the same ones that ran a smear campaign against Black midwives, ruined the care that birthing people received, politicized abortion, and demanded that they get paid lots of money for claiming to be the first people to give reproductive care when we know that they were not the first people to give reproductive care. Then, in the early 1900s, the eugenics movement really took off in the United States. Eugenics is selecting the most desirable heritable characteristics to improve future generations. This also means doing away with the less desirable traits. Eugenics was seen as a means of protecting society from the offspring of individuals who were deemed inferior or dangerous. This included the poor, mentally ill, people who committed crimes, and later down the road, of course, people of color and Black people. Eugenics in the United States took shape in the form of experiments and sterilization. Around the time that eugenics was ramping up in the United States, Margaret Sanger was advocating for the legalization of birth control. While birth control is amazing and the fact that it was the feminist ticket to bodily freedom for men, some of it came at the expense of Black women and other women of color. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, is seen as the mother of birth control. She saw women's ability to control their own reproduction as essential to their freedom. Sanger originally defended birth control due to feminism, but at the time that Sanger started her fight for birth control, America had accepted the theory of eugenics, that intelligence and other personality traits are inherited. Psychologists and other doctors were using scientific racism to justify eugenics. Sanger's solution to stopping generations of undesirable classes was to push birth control into those communities. Margaret Sanger's racist alliances and belief in eugenics caused irreparable damage to the health and lives of countless people. And at times, Sanger did try to argue for eugenics that was not applied based on race or religion, but in a society built on the belief of white supremacy, physical and mental fitness are always judged based on race. Eugenics, therefore, is inherently racist. Sanger started a project that she called the Negro Project, where she aimed to bring birth control to the Black community in the South. The mission of the Negro Project was to put Black doctors and Black nurses in charge of birth control clinics to reduce the very well-earned mistrust of a racist healthcare system. But Sanger lost control of the project, and Black women were sent to white doctors for birth control and follow-up appointments, deepening the racist and paternalistic problems of healthcare in the South. We already know what happens when the reproductive health of Black women is in the hands of white men. This resulted in experimenting different forms of birth control in the Black community, as well as in other communities of color, causing damage to the health and lives of generations of Black people, Latino people, Indigenous people, and immigrants. So with that being said, I want to emphasize that Planned Parenthood believes that all people of every race, religion, gender identity, ability, immigration status, and geography are full human beings with the right to determine their own future and decide without coercion or judgments whether and when to have children. Margaret Sanger's belief in eugenics is in direct opposition to our mission. Planned Parenthood denounces Margaret Sanger's belief in eugenics, and further, we denounce the history and legacy of anti-Blackness in gynecology and in the reproductive rights movement, and the mistreatment that continues against Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in this country. So sterilization has always been used as punishment for Black people and people of color. In fact, in 1855, the territorial legislature of Kansas enacted a law making castration the penalty for any Negro or mulatto who was convicted of rape, attempted rape, or kidnapping of any white women. Many other states also had similar legislation for Black people. So it comes as no surprise that sterilization took place later on in the United States at a much larger scale. After the 1927 Buck v. Bell ruling, where sterilizing patients of public institutions became legal, states did not hesitate to enact similar policies. States then moved to placing Black people in public institutions just to sterilize them. Because the patients were considered not intelligent enough, they were not asked for consent, and the doctors and staff of the institutions were all white. However, most sterilizations of Black women and women of color were not performed under eugenics laws and policies. Instead, they were committed by doctors paid by the government to provide health care for these women. Black women were routinely sterilized without their informed consent and for no valid medical reason. Teaching hospitals performed unnecessary hysterectomies on Black women as practice for their medical students. Along with the sterilizations, radical and dangerous procedures were used when alternatives were available. Medical records didn't reflect what was really done to patients. Patients were pressured into signing consent forms without adequate explanation, and doctors were treating the patients horribly. Black women, Latino women, and Native women were specifically targeted. From the 1930s to the 1970s, nearly 1/3 of women in Puerto Rico were coerced into sterilization when the government claimed that their economy would be better off with a reduced population. In the 60s and 70s, Black women made up over 65% of all sterilizations, despite only making up 25% of the population. And also in the 60s and 70s, 25% of Indigenous women were being sterilized, even during the Supreme Court ruling of Roe v. Wade. During slavery, Black women were forced to take care of white families and children, but were somehow unfit to care for their own. At least that was the narrative that white people had to push. So after slavery, when reproduction was no longer benefiting white people, they wanted to stop Black women from reproducing. So birth control and sterilization was pushed onto Black women. After those surges died down and Black women continued to have children, the solution was to criminalize the reproduction of Black women. The myth of Black women being bad mothers has traveled through time and aids in legislation that criminalizes reproduction. It helped Ronald Reagan crack down on the poor and reduce public benefits by telling people that Black women were welfare queens who lived to have lots of children in order to receive government assistance. It also aided Reagan during the war on drugs by jailing mothers for child abuse if they tested positive for substances. When a pregnant woman was arrested for engaging with substances during pregnancy, her crime was the decision to continue the pregnancy. However, she would not be prosecuted and jailed if she had an abortion. But if she had chose to give birth, she would go to prison. On the other hand, a judge could give the option of birth control or jail, and incarceration is the punishment for deciding to remain fertile. However, if she violated probation by giving birth, she was sent to prison. These laws were put in place to criminalize Black women and in an attempt to slow Black women's birthing rates. Again, nothing to do with the well-being of children. It was easy for prosecutors and judges to see poor Black women as suitable subjects for these policies because society never viewed these women as suitable mothers or people in the first place. Our ability to control what happens to our bodies is constantly challenged by poverty, racism, environmental degradation, sexism, homophobia, and injustice in the United States. This quote is a good summation of the history of reproductive oppression. The politicization of abortion started with the racist intent to keep Black women from practicing reproductive care so that white men could be seen as the founders of gynecology. The stigma around abortion and reproductive care has evolved to include the effects of poverty, environmental degradation, sexism, and homophobia that we see today in the reproductive healthcare. So as you can see, anti-abortion efforts are not new at all and have nothing to do with protecting the interests of children. From forced sterilization, experimenting on infertile enslaved women, forced abortion as punishment, and so much more, the domination over enslaved Black women's wombs provided a blueprint for reproductive control. And again, I just want to emphasize that these anti-abortion efforts are rooted in racism, white supremacy, the exploitation of Black women, and in placing birthing bodies in service to men. So, thank you all for hanging in there to hear all of that information. I hope that you've all learned something. I know that it was a lot of info in a very small amount of time, and it's really just the tip of the iceberg. But it's important to know where these anti-abortion restrictions come from so we know how to defeat them and go about it in a way that gives us justice for all. So now we will talk about the anti-abortion constitutional amendment that we have here in Kansas in our home. In 2019, the Kansas Supreme Court found a right to abortion in the Kansas Constitution. And this was a huge win for us. It's a big deal because many other states don't have the right to abortion protected by their state constitution, but Kansas does. But of course, our opposition doesn't like that. So on the day that the Supreme Court found the right to abortion in the Kansas Constitution, our opposition announced that they were going to try to take away that right. So in 2020, an amendment to remove the right to abortion from the state constitution was proposed, but through the efforts of our amazing supporters and volunteers, we lobbied and defeated the amendment. However, later in 2020, we lost some of the legislators on our side after the election. So with the makeup of our legislature being different in 2021, the amendment was proposed again, and this time it passed. And I'm sorry, this should say 2022. So here's what the amendment says. Because Kansas valued both women and children, The Constitution of the state of Kansas does not require government funding of abortion and does not create or secure a right to abortion. To the extent permitted by the Constitution of the United States, the people, through their elected state representatives and state senators, may pass laws regarding abortion, including, but not limited to, laws that account for circumstances of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest, or circumstances of necessity to save the life of the mother. Every time I read this amendment, I get upset. So I'd love to hear how you all are feeling after seeing and hearing the language. What are your first reactions? And you can come off mute if you like.
Rachel, I've got to comment that the fact that it says may, not will, means that this constitutional amendment will be passed with no right to some exceptions, and that scares me to death.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I even when this amendment was on the floor and they were asked if exceptions would be made, our opposition stated outright that exceptions would not be made. But they have in this language here that maybe they'll make some exceptions, but it's up to them. And they've already said that they won't. So the language is definitely misleading. It's confusing. It says that the state of Kansas does not require government funding of abortion. The government already does not fund abortion. So like I said, the wording of this language is intentionally misleading and confusing.
Rachel, am
Yes.
I correct that the explanation of the amendment goes on further to describe in very biased terms what a yes vote means and a no vote means, and that part will be on the ballot?
Yes, it should be. The last of what I heard, it should be on the ballot.
Yes, but it's
hope so,
very
because-
deceptive as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely.
You were asking for people's comments on it.
Mhm.
It includes disgusted, mad, none of their business, the circumstances of one's pregnancy.
Mhm.
This country has so much to be ashamed of and undo. Here is a question from Janet. Please talk a little more about what will happen to Kansas law with passing this amendment. Will we immediately lose the right to abortion?
Right. That's a great question. So no, we would not immediately lose the right to abortion. Or yes, we would lose the right to abortion, but it wouldn't ban abortion or anything outright. We can assume that their next move would be to ban abortion outright because the right is no longer in our Constitution. So it take the right away, but it wouldn't make it illegal yet. But it opens the door for them to ban it.
So it would require enabling legislation.
Yes.
Correct. Yes. And the second part of her question then is talk about what potentially this would mean for women with ectopic, I can't ever say that, pregnancy, I think you know the word, or seeking IVF or other help with fertility. What are the implications of passage of the amendment?
Right. That's a great question that may be answered in my next slide where I talked about impact. Okay. But, they don't consider those things. They don't. And I don't know that they care about those things. Proposing this amendment even shows that. So let's go on to talk about the impact of this amendment.
Great.
Thank you. So if passed, this amendment would be the first step in banning abortion outright. We know this because the politicians and organizations behind this amendment have explicitly stated that they want to ban abortion. And we can only imagine what Kansas would be like without that abortion access. Kansans would have to travel across state lines, if they can afford to access legal abortion or be forced to carry their pregnancy to term. There are many reasons why forcing a pregnant person to carry to term is terrible and wrong. But when we look at it from a class perspective, it keeps poor and working class folks where they are. It strips opportunities and disrupts dreams and futures. Forcing pregnant people to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term nearly quadruples their chances of living below the federal poverty line. That is massive. This is an attack on the reproductive rights of poor and working class Kansans. It's also an attack on pregnant people, obviously. Pregnant people are 14 times more likely to die during pregnancy or childbirth than from a safe and legal abortion in the United States. Black women specifically are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during pregnancy or childbirth due to the systemic racism in the field of healthcare. Forcing people to give birth without acknowledging that fact and implementing policies to combat the systemic racism will increase the rate of maternal mortality, as well as those ectopic pregnancies, right? Because it says that the politicians will get to decide which exceptions will be made, and they've already said that they won't make any. So this is very dangerous. Deciding when and if someone has a child is essential for one's economic, psychological, and physical well-being. This amendment is yet another policy that further upholds the racist, sexist, and classist ideals that reproductive restrictions and controls were founded on. I also want to mention that Kansas is a hotspot for abortion access right now. We are absorbing all of the patients, or not all of the patients, but we're absorbing some patients from Texas, from Oklahoma, from Arkansas, from Missouri. And if Kansas loses that access, it's detrimental to abortion access across the Midwest, because we're already seeing folks from other states, including Kansans. So this amendment is very dangerous. And so I want to power map those who would benefit from this amendment's success. The amendment that could remove the right to abortion from the Kansas Constitution is not happening in a vacuum. It would benefit people who can use the issue of abortion as a vehicle for their own political gains. And this applies to many candidates running for office across the state. This amendment was also created by the same people who work to distract us with abortion politics while they continue to undermine our power through underfunding public schools, giving wealthy people tax breaks, and suppressing our right to vote. These policies have taken many forms throughout history, but they are rooted in white supremacy. Underfunding public schools has a long history that ties back to segregation. Voter suppression laws, of course, have the most disparate impact of communities of color. And the issue of abortion is often used as a cover for these intentional attacks on our communities. And finally, those who want to ban abortion outright also benefit from this amendment. And those include Kansans for Life, the Kansas Catholic Conference, and the Family Policy Alliance. So as I've said plenty of times, this amendment is extremely dangerous and it's a huge threat to Kansans' rights. And I know that with this fight in Kansas and the attempt to strip reproductive rights nationwide, it can be easy to feel defeated, but this amendment is winnable. We can win it and we will win it. So how are we going to do that, you may wonder? So this is the timeline for Planned Parenthood Great Plains, right? Right now, we're building our base to create a strong and powerful movement. We are educating our advocates, identifying leaders among us, and connecting with current community leaders, as well as training activists to get the word out about this amendment. In May and June is when we will start voter contact. We will be calling and texting voters and putting out media ads. From June to August is when door-to-door canvassing will start and the phone banks will multiply because we'll be telling everyone to vote every second of the day. And then August 2nd is the day of the big vote, and August 3rd will be time to rest and debrief because once that's done, we'll have to continue to build this movement. Even once we defeat this amendment, the attacks will not stop. So in addition to the tactics that I just talked about, Planned Parenthood Great Plains has joined with Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity, Trust Women in the ACLU of Kansas to create a coalition to defeat the amendment. And this coalition is named Kansans for Constitutional Freedom. Together, we will work to turn people out to the polls. And we're also made up of these groups who are on our steering committee. Women for Kansas is on our steering committee, Catholics for Choice, Douglas County Democratic Party, Johnson County Democratic Party, Kansas Abortion Fund, the League of Women Voters, and Mainstream Coalition. These groups and organizations on our steering committee endorse the coalition, and they update their supporters and group members with what's going on in the coalition and in the campaign to defeat the amendment. The steering committee gives us important information and helps steer us with our decisions, and they are the groups that get information from the campaign. So if any of you know a group that isn't a part of the steering committee now, but would like to be, please let Susan know or reach out to me and we can talk about what that would look like. Our steering committee is a big piece of our coalition. They are very important and we appreciate the commitment to help us defeat this amendment because we cannot do it on our own at all. So next, I want to talk with you all about how to have these conversations about abortion and anti-abortion legislation with your friends and family. Abortion is not an inherently political issue. If we're going to build a future in Kansas where all people can live the lives they deserve, we must neutralize abortion and talk about it for what it is, which is healthcare. So here are 3 ways to talk about the Kansas Amendment so we can move towards that future. The first message is, we know that all pregnant Kansans deserve the right to make their own decisions about abortion, free of government interference and overreach. If this amendment passes, these decisions will no longer be made by patients facing complex and unique situations. They will be made by politicians in Topeka. And so this is where you can really hone in on that government interference. If this amendment passed, politicians who know nothing about our personal lives and situations will be able to make decisions for us and our families, and that's not right. Another message is that if this amendment passes, politicians in Topeka will move quickly to ban abortion outright, and this will harm women all across Kansas, but we know that the amendment will dramatically impact underserved Kansans. And so something we can add to this message is that we know that this amendment will not stop abortions from happening. People will continue to seek abortion care, even if it's not in our state constitution, and even if it's banned. And one other message is that it's critical that we stop the amendment now so we can protect the rights of Kansans, continue our work to support these communities, and help better understand the importance of reproductive health care. If we want to build to a Kansas where we have true reproductive justice and freedom, defeating this amendment is just the first step. But most importantly, you all are the messengers. So when you have these conversations, one of the most important things to do is to find common values between you and the person that you're having this conversation with. We all have different stories, experiences, and information to bring to the table. And while this is a great thing, it also means that sometimes the conversation can shift to something other than the topic at hand. But once you've figured out that common value, you can always bring the conversation back to that value, like the government shouldn't have any say in our personal lives. Having these complex conversations, including ones about abortion, can be a bit easier once you've identified some common values. And most importantly, don't worry, we will have more than 3 talking points. We are continuing to develop the most effective research-based messaging. The last thing that we want to do is say the wrong thing and lose votes. So please stay tuned for more messaging. So I know that I've given you a lot of information and I hope that it has fueled you to want to help us defeat this amendment. Many of you may have been waiting for things to do, so I will tell you how you can have a hand in defending reproductive freedom in Kansas. You can sign the Pledge to Vote No petition. Please sign this petition. My colleague Lauren will drop that in the chat. Please sign it and send it to 3 of your friends. When you go out and have these conversations about abortion in this amendment, try to have that pledge on hand so you can have that person sign up right then and there. It may feel like this pledge and petition isn't doing much, but when we start voter contact, we'll be contacting people that pledged to make sure that they vote. So please spread the pledge around and please get people to sign it. Oops, sorry. Another way that you can help is by joining us in our Defeat the Kansas Amendment phone banks. Every Tuesday, Planned Parenthood Great Plains Votes host phone banks where we call the people of Kansas to inform them of this amendment. Many folks in Kansas still don't know about this huge issue that's on the ballot this year, so you can help us spread the word that way. We have a training at the beginning of the phone bank so that folks are trained up and feel comfortable to start making calls. We also stay on the Zoom muted while we make calls so that we have each other there for support, for questions, and for stories that we want to share from the night. Phone banks are a great way to practice talking about the amendments and a fun way to connect with other advocates that are in this fight with us. So please, please, please sign up for a phone bank. And also, if you are able and willing to donate, please do. Campaigns cost a lot of money, and unfortunately, this fight for reproductive freedom requires funding. Of course, the amount that you donate doesn't matter. If you're only able to give $1, we'll take it. Every cent counts, and we will take every single cent that we can get. Another thing that you can do is sign up for updates from Planned Parenthood. We keep folks updated about upcoming events, updates, and opportunities via text and email. So if you want to know about these things as they happen, please sign up. So thank you all so much for having me. I hope that you've all learned something and will share with our fellow Kansans. If anyone has any questions, I am more than happy to answer them.
Rachel, thank you so much. That was just excellent. I'll ask the first question, and I know Marla Flungy we've got some excellent questions and comments from our viewers. Research shows that most Kansans, especially women, who call themselves pro-life, support some exceptions, yet this law doesn't really allow for them, even though they act like they do. There's a lot of misinformation. How do we convey that this is not a women-friendly amendment?
I would say by just talking about how it doesn't put women first, right? They call it the Value Them Both Amendment, but by taking that right away from women, that's already not valuing women. And I think also, like someone asked earlier about the ectopic pregnancies and all of those, pregnancy can be very complicated. And so having a law that takes the right away from everybody with no exceptions and without taking into account how complicated it can be, I feel like that also conveys that it's not for women, because not everyone has an easy time with pregnancy.
Thank you. I know there have been some horror stories out of Texas regarding ectopic pregnancies, et cetera. Marla, do you want to join in and
I do.
Ask the questions? Thank you.
Rachel, this was stunning information for me, and I suspect for most people on this program today. We all understand the efforts to control women's bodies in the 21st century, but I dare say we didn't fully understand how that is built on the torture and abuse of Black women throughout a good part of our history. So thank you for that. The first question is pretty easy. Someone asked how they could get a copy of your slides, your PowerPoint slides, separate from our video, which will be on YouTube.
Okay, I can be able to make a copy so that no one will be able to edit it, and I can send it to you and Susan, so that way you guys can take a look at it.
Great, we'll make sure we get that out. An observation which you may want to add comment to from Anne. She suggests that one consequence of passage of the amendment could take the right to body autonomy to include transgender operations, plastic surgery, or anything else white men who run the place don't like.
Yes. don't like and also don't understand. They don't know anything about our bodies. And you can see, looking at other states that are passing anti-abortion legislation, they're not also attacking abortion. They're also attacking birth control. And like you said, trans people. So it's definitely an attack on all of us in all ways.
We have Megan, who posted for us a Boston Globe story in the chat that indicates that a bill in Missouri is including ectopic pregnancies as one of many elements of its anti-abortion legislation. Don't know if that's unique or not, but our neighbor to the east is certainly involved in that. Let's see what else we have here. A question from Janet. How are you targeting the phone bank calls? I think we've all had experiences with nobody picking up anymore.
Yes.
How do you take that into account?
Right. So right now we are targeting the 6 voter turnout counties in Kansas. So that's Sedgwick, Wyandotte, Riley. I'm sorry, I can't think of the other 3.
Johnson,
yes. There's
probably Saline, perhaps.
I don't know if Celine is on there. But yeah, this is just our first round of phone banks. And so it's the 6 target counties, folks aged from 18, I think, to 44. We're just calling folks to let them know about the amendment. And then once we move on to our second round of phone banks, we'll try a different list. But I will say that these last few phone banks that we've seen, the numbers are a little more clean. And so sometimes now we are getting people that is for that cell phone instead of like, oh, you've got the wrong number. So like the further we go on, the more we'll actually connect with real people instead of voicemails and disconnected.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Dawn talks about another consequence if the amendment passes. Her question is, when we say the politicians will decide healthcare, that raises the question of exactly who will decide on behalf of the government when someone is, quote, sick enough, unquote, to end a pregnancy. Clergy? Do 10 doctors have to agree? Some appointed panel? Who is the decider if this is no longer up to women?
I have no idea. And that's the scary part, right?
Yes, just some vague government entity, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Don jumped in and said, is Douglas County one of the 6 targeted counties for the phone banking?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. And Rachel, correct me if I'm mistaken, my understanding was that the Kansans for Constitutional Freedom was doing focus groups, 6 focus groups the week before last that was going to help with framing the message. Is that correct?
Yes, we are in the process of doing journaling. I think we have a few more weeks to get done. We've done, we are in the process of that.
Okay. So I'm scrolling through the questions. Susan, do you have another question while I'm looking through
yes,
this?
I wanted to say that one of our viewers, Janet, comments that this presentation may help speak to people with a religious background, and I agree with that, because I think that most religious people see there is room for exceptions, and this constitutional amendment doesn't give us that. So if they want to vote for something and they feel that that shouldn't be this amendment, they should vote against this amendment, because this amendment takes everything away.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, I'll have to see if I could get a group of maybe a clergy member who would let me present for them.
Yes.
So other questions that people have? Oh, here's, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, Rachel, but somebody here may. This comes from Sherry. Why isn't the Sedgwick County Democratic Party represented on the steering committee?
I'm not sure. I know, yeah, I can't answer that. But if someone on the board of that group wants to be on the steering committee, please reach out and we will get that set up.
You know, I've got a comment. I think that there is someone from Sedgwick County Democrats that is on the committee. I'll have to check that, but I believe so.
And also, I'm not present in the steering committee meetings. I'm not sure how updated that list is, and I'm not sure who attends those meetings, but that's just the list that I have right now. There may be more people on there that I may have forgot to include.
Rachel, it's a question I've been mulling. The title of the amendment is value them both, women and children. Have you given thought to how to fully address the people who say, well, doesn't this value women and children equally because it allows the unborn an opportunity for life, while at the same time valuing their mothers?
Yeah, and I think right, and they want to make it, and they make it so confusing, and they phrase it that way because that's how they want people to think. And so actually some of the research that we've also been doing is to find a tag for this amendment, how to phrase it, because they call it value them both, and we need something to fight that, to show that it doesn't value them both. And so, like, I know we've been saying the anti-abortion amendment, but that's not what we've concluded what we're going to call it. But yeah, I get that point. So yeah, we're trying to figure out how to make it obvious that it's not valuing both.
Well, our own Women for Kansas leader, Susan, has come up with the value women less amendment. So I like that. We'll see if that sticks in the messaging. Several other comments, and if any of our viewers also have thought through how you will address the value children part of that title, we would welcome your thoughts. Here, this is a question from Jill. Have you tested a message using the religious freedom argument? My church isn't strictly pro-life. So we're seeing lots of laws right now, cases going to the Supreme Court, challenging people's religious freedom. Have you talked about that in the context of this amendment?
We have. I know in the journaling, there is language about religion and such, and we also have clergy members on our steering committee, so that is something that we're always keeping in mind. Okay.
So we'll probably be hearing more about that.
Yes.
Okay.
After all the research.
And Janet has a comment. Kansas's social safety net stinks, and that's just an empty statement.
Yes, it does. I agree. I agree.
I would have to comment that one of our viewers links this with the legislators refusing to expand Medicaid, which would, of course, help poor families and move them into being able to have health care. And I think that's an excellent point. So if they really valued children, they would have expanded Medicaid a long time ago. And I agree with this lady, Ann, because I feel the same way.
So, Rachel, I've had a number of women say to me, I'm seeing bumper stickers everywhere for the Value Them Both Amendment. I'm seeing yard signs. When are we going to get our message out? So semi-panic. Can you give us some assurance that we aren't running out of time yet?
Yes.
To get our message out.
We are working right now. We're working on postcards to mail out, and then will come the bumper stickers, the yard signs, all of that with the messaging. I can't tell you when that's going to come out, but we are working on postcards right now. But that stuff will come. And I understand the panic though, because I've seen them too. I'm like,
my understanding is you're building in considerable money in the Kansas for Constitutional Freedom budget for media, including television buys. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so it's coming.
It is coming. It is coming.
So Anne has a post for us that's, or actually not a link, but she observes that providing universally available birth control and contraception would prevent many abortions. And of course, we know that scientifically from the Colorado experience, correct?
Mm-hmm. And we know that sex education would help, but these people also don't want that taught in schools. Like there's so many other things they could be focused on and improving, but instead they don't.
So the focus is not on the focus is not on preventing pregnancy. It's on controlling women.
Exactly.
Correct. Yes.
Correct.
David Norland asks, if it's coming, what is the message? And I think you covered that earlier in your presentation, but if you wouldn't mind repeating it, kind of where you are in the process.
Yeah, so we're still doing journalings. Hopefully in a few weeks, we will have some more clear, concise messages that we're able to push out. But yeah, so we just have those 3 messages for right now that we know stick, because this isn't the first fight we've had with this. So we know that those 3 messages work, and we're still doing research to get some more.
Okay, and so for people who may not be familiar with the focus group process and how it works, could you explain a little bit about that and why that's the preferred approach to shaping a message rather than just putting 10 people in a room and brainstorming?
Yeah. Yeah. So we want to figure out how people are talking about abortion and what moves them in certain directions, right? So we contacted recruiters to get groups of people together and ask them certain questions. And so based on their reactions to the questions about religion and freedom and government is how we frame our messaging. And some of the messaging that we think may work or may not work, we ask these people to test their reactions. And they are people from all over Kansas with different kinds of experiences and things like that. So it's not a very general like statement or message that comes out of that, if that makes sense. Does that answer the question?
I'll wait to hear from David if that's helpful or not. Susan, do you have something else?
Yes, I did want to mention that one of our viewers, Emily, says that they are selling vote no signs through Sedgwick County Democrats. So I think some of the groups have already gotten their signs out. I might also mention that there's kind of a oxymoron going on with people who say, don't touch my body. You know, I have autonomy when it comes to requiring masks, but they want the government to have control over your body when it comes to reproductive health care. And that concerns me. And I think we really ought to mention that to people who use the argument.
Definitely.
An observation from Pam, one consequence that legislators who are favoring this amendment probably don't want to think about. She points out her representative won't vote for Medicaid expansion because he says it will cost a lot more money. But she points out the amendment would cost a lot in additional medical bills and support for unwanted children who will be needing either foster care or adoption. She says, I hate focusing on economics, but it does speak to some people.
Oh, yes, definitely. And as someone who's worked in the child services field, I don't imagine that putting more children in that situation would help at all or benefit any children. So
I've got one correction, and that is that it's Sedgwick County Democratic women that are selling the yard signs that say vote no.
And that was from Jane. Jane, if you could put in the chat exactly where people might get those or who they would contact, that would be helpful.
And the League of Women Voters has a vote no business card available.
And I really appreciate David's eagerness to figure out this message. Rachel, one more time, when will the so-called ground game start with the message that you all are planning on, messages or message that you all are planning on using as part of the campaign?
When we start voter contact. So that's going to be, I think, May, June-ish.
May or June? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I would really encourage you to let everyone know that the sooner they can do this, the better, because the opponents have their ground game going already.
I know. I have no decision making.
I know. But certainly on the coalition, and we're a member, we can certainly push that message.
Yes, after this program today, Susan and I both sit on the steering committee for Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, and we will definitely convey the eagerness to have that message. And it is important that we have a unified message. We don't want our partners going 10 different directions, but the sooner we can get that message, the better for our heartburn and for defeating the amendment.
And Lauren Klepper has put into the chat both the pledge that you can sign, the vote no pledge, and also if you want to help with the phone calls.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren.
Dawn has put in a comment that the Johnson County Democratic women already have their bumper sticker with a never again verbiage and a coat hanger. Most people will understand that. Certainly women will. Rachel, this may be more a question for the steering committee, but Silly, I hope I'm saying her name right. How do you inform college students who will be leaving campuses in mid-May?
We are planning, Planned Parenthood, at least, Planned Parenthood Great Plains, we're planning on tabling at universities now that it's getting warmer and folks will be more outside. We're wanting to table and canvass at any events on campus. So that way we can get them registered to vote and all of that. So.
Janet made a calming observation to those of us who are worried about this campaign. She said, putting out signs too soon can mean your message becomes background noise.
That is also true, yes.
Yes.
And also we want to make sure that we're putting, the right message on the yard signs. We you don't want to find out that afterwards, oh, maybe that shouldn't have been up. So
Right.
yeah, thank you for that.
And Jane just observed from Sedgwick County that the signs are by Faith and Donna Worth, but she can't find their email addresses, but she suggests you go to the Facebook page for Sedgwick County Democratic Women.
Okay, thank you.
So Susan, we may be wrapping up the questions.
Yes. Are you done with the questions? I've got a couple of reminders and a personal comment. I want to thank Rachel and everyone who's been a part of this. This means a lot to me personally, and the reason is that my grandmother died 106 years ago from an abortion. I cannot describe how this affected and destroyed her family and my father. And I don't want to see us go back there again. So I have two reminders. First, this presentation will be on the Women for Kansas YouTube channel shortly, so that you can tell friends who have not seen it or you want to provide this as a presentation to a group. It will be available. Second, well, I guess I've got three. The second one is that if you would like to give donations to the Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, I think they could use those. And finally, Women for Kansas will have our statewide convention on June 4th. So please mark your calendar. We will further discuss this and other key issues. So stay tuned. And with that, I want to thank Rachel. Rachel, bravo. Bravo. Thank you to everyone who joined us on this Saturday morning. And we shall talk again about this subject. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Have a nice Saturday, guys.
Thank you, everyone.